Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius, and we are joining the Jupiter Mining Corps. No, are we not? Or are we joining a pre-Nostromo mining organization? We're going to find out. We're going to be talking about Outland from 1981. But Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing fine. I'm a little scared that James Bond is going to slap me around.
Yeah. I think that I don't know if that was him threatening to sort of, in this film he threatens to slap around a female doctor. I feel that may have been an ad-libbed line from Sean Connery rather than from the character.
Yeah, indeed.
I think that was just but yes, we're talking about Outland from 1981, a story in which a marshal played by Sean Connery goes and visits, or is assigned to a mining organization on a moon surrounding Jupiter. And whilst he's there, people start to die under mysterious circumstances, and he starts to look into the level of deaths that are going on and finds they are related to a drug, I suppose, that has been the miners are using to up productivity, and he ends up taking on the mining organization that results in a final high noon showdown. So we're going to get to that.
High Noon is an apt reference because, I mean, literally he's a marshal. I mean, this is a Western in space. And
this is totally like a remake of that kind of High Noon, Rio Bravo kind of... I love it for that. I actually love it for that. But what are your thoughts on Outland to begin with?
I think it's surprisingly good. I think it is, to my mind, it's certainly, like probably, in the fair sort of like 6 range, but I could see somebody scoring it a little higher too. In the solid, good, sort of 7 range. I know we're not doing our official ratings yet, but no, I think that it starts slowly. It starts shockingly slowly, especially for today, right? It's like, oh yes, I forgot how slow the 1980s was. But then once it gets going, it's really fast. By the time you're halfway through, you know who did it. You know everything that's going on. It's advanced very quickly. Obviously, there are those sort of Sean Connery moments that are misogynistic, that are off-putting for their celebration of violence, especially toward women. But then you get into this sort of it sort of starts to drag again, and then you get this conclusion that's both fantastic, like it's well done, it goes shoots for the stars, but also is clunky at the same time. But overall, I thought, this is once it gets going, this is working pretty well.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. Actually, I really enjoyed it. I do really enjoy this one. I think I'll be one of the ones. We'll get to the official ratings, but that sort of higher 7 is probably where I sit. You say about this, the thing about it being, it is slow. Like, don't get me wrong. This film starts, and it takes a little time to. You're introduced to characters. You've got to be introduced to the environment, and because of that, there is a lot of exposition about certain things, and so it does take a while to get going. But I just love the atmosphere. This film sort of sets up a really good atmosphere And I think this comes down to there's we're going to get to some comparisons to other films and stuff, and what universe or what canon this could be applied to. But like Jerry Goldsmith's score on this sort of seems to apply this really nice sort of like this. This is not a nice place to be. It doesn't glorify this thing. It's a mining. It is literally a mining town on the moon of Jupiter, and it's grungy and it's sort of even the living quarters. Like so, Sean Connery has a wife and son, who they end up leaving him, and not so much because of anything that he sort of does, but more because of this environment. They've had to go from mining colony to mining colony, and it's always been the same. And she says, "Well, the sun's never seen the Earth." But this great point, like even the living quarters are not a comfortable looking environment. Like there's almost like an industrialness to everything, and I love that look.
Yeah, and literally the walls look grimy. Like
Mm.
everything has this patina of grime. Like I find myself thinking, don't they have like Clorox wipes out there? Um, this
Yeah.
isn't that hard to take care of. But no, I mean it seems to be taking sort of the alien Nostromo sort of to the next level.
Well, yeah. I mean, you say that. I mean, th- there's an aesthetic to this film and I was about halfway through, and I literally Googled to be like, does Outland exist in the same universe as Alien? Forget Aliens and Alien 3 and all that other stuff, but does this exist in the same continuity as Alien? And I'm not the first, and I'm not the only one. Like there are people that have written like big articles on this about the comparisons, everything down to like the designs of the space suits, but like just everything about this film feels like. And there's a distance in time because obviously this takes place in like 2149 or something, and then the other one takes place in 22. So there's a distance in time, but there's very much a sense of sort of that sort of like blue collar working person like that. The Nostromo could quite easily be picking up ore from this colony to then to take it back to Earth. Like it would fit perfectly. So yeah, I love that feel.
Well, and also both plots are about corporations not
Mm.
caring if their employees die. I think it's a little more direct in Alien.
Mm.
You know, I mean, there's something more savage about having, an alien kill your people and you don't care because you want that alien for R&D. But here the plot is that there's a drug. The drug makes people more productive. It just makes them go crazy after,
Mm.
12 months. Now, that's a little convenient, right? I mean, it's a little pat, but yeah, okay. And obviously it's illegal, but everybody turns a blind eye. It's basically how things are expected to be run.
Well, yeah, there's some because it comes down to there's some performances in this, like because this could be one of the things I would say is there's the risk of a film like this becoming a bit too arch. You could because you do have those corporate villains are in this film, especially Peter Boyle as sort of like the general manager of the mine in town. And he could, there's a risk in this where he could be playing this sort of like that sort of like comedic, stereotypical Western land baron that's like, all I care about is profit. But he plays it like Peter Boyle is a really I really like him in this film because he's just as downtrodden as everybody else. He's like, I
Mhm.
don't want to be in this hellhole either. But in order for me to do what I need to do, this is the way it's got to work. And so I'm
Yeah.
going to do that because he's not clearly not making like huge profits from this. Like he's not his own personal gain is I'm looked upon favorably, which means I can leave at a certain point. Like that's it. He's just as much a cog in the wheel as everybody else, and I kind of like that as well.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I got the sense that he is making profit, and he is, they might be substantial profits, at
Mm.
least compared to everybody else in the mine, but that his goal is certainly to use that to, get out of there. And
Mm.
he talks about having a family. Um, I'm sure we'll get back to Sean Connery's family
Mm.
and how we understand that. But no, I quite like this thing, and it dovetails nicely with what Dr. Lazarus says about like, I'm not a very good doctor. Like,
Yeah.
uh, look, if I were a good doctor, I wouldn't be assigned out here. Why are you committed to being a good marshal? I mean, that whole discussion I think is fascinating and frames the entire film in a way that it's integrated with the plot in a way that it isn't in most films, right?
Mm.
It's like a background theme in most other films. Here, you can't understand anything that's happening without how sort of disposable those miners are, how thoughtless the system is, and how the marshal is doing what he's doing precisely because he has nothing more to lose except um, his respect for himself and his
Mm.
family's respect.
Yeah, I do want to get to that actually, because that's the main theme of this. Is like you say, there's clearly been other marshals because they do a tour. So they do this tour, so they're rotated through, and he does have like a team of people, and they've all turned a blind eye to it, and they're all clearly aware of this. And there's a great scene. Again, like there's almost like this film does well at turning things into the mundane. Like it sort of tunes into, because it could be again that this comes from that griminess of the 70s, doesn't it? That sort of post um, polished futurism that existed. Is this is everything? You say everything's grimy, and there's a mundane sort of banality to being a marshal on this thing as well, where they go through like, okay, well, what happened in this area? What's happened in that area? And they're all a bit like, oh, you know, there's been a bit of like there was a small fight, nothing to worry about. We've heard this, we've heard that. Like even the
Mm-hmm.
marshals, like it's become an everyday occurrence. Like this is, there's nothing here where it's sort of like there was a laser fight in sector 52. It's more a case of like, no, there were some miners had a scuffle, they've been drunk. We put them in the
Mm-hmm.
tank overnight and it's done. Like this is banal. It's repetitive. This is a almost like a forgotten. The people at this place are forgotten. I mean, it made me think of like what it must be like to live on oil rigs and in these sorts of places for long periods of time. So yeah, I like that like you say, it's sort of it comes down to this theme of like, do you become just a part of it or do you stand up to it? And that's obviously where Sean Connery's character gets to. And he's asked, isn't he, at one point, like, what is it to be a good man? Like, is he good, or what people believe him to be? Is that true? So I like all that.
Yeah, and we can get into that in more depth, and I'm
Mm.
sure we will. This thing about the griminess, obviously the '70s, everything was falling apart. Um, so it reflects that period. But also, I can't help but think all of that's true, and I like all of that. I like the prostitutes. I mean, unfortunately, they're some of the only women. It's like the doctor's allowed to be a woman. There's no female minors. It's not progressive like Alien in that respect. But then I do find myself wondering, uh, not to the extent of like Event Horizon, although there were times I thought of that,
Mm.
but I do find myself wondering, like, it's so grimy. Um, why do you have so much space? Like, why do you make these corridors so roomy and so long? Like, and the exterior shots of this mining facility are like, this is fucking enormous.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the size of a city. Um, and yeah, I know some actual mining facilities are, but it doesn't, it's like how obviously like water the Nostromo and Alien is enormous and it's filled with water everywhere. Like everything that, would not be the case in real life
Yeah.
is the case out there. But it still is supposed to feel grimy. But there's this weird way in which if you think about it, it feels like really luxurious.
Mm.
Um, and I did have some of the same thoughts here that uh, even their attitude toward air. There were some shots, and some discussions where I'm like, oh yeah, you totally take having air for granted here. You're filling these enormous spaces with air. these enormous recreational spaces, these enormous traveling
the
spaces.
but also, like I say, the greenhouse area at the end, sort of
Oh
like
my God. Yeah,
yeah,
this giant greenhouse area, which is so easily shattered. You've destroyed
yeah,
this mat out the food supply for the entire place. Everybody starves in the next reel, um, which I'm sure we'll get to. But no, I mean, there is this sense of luxury at the same
mm,
time. Not to mention people smoking. I mean, we can get into the silly computer graphics and things like this. But, the fact that, like, oh, yeah, it's impossible to imagine having a mining colony in pressurized oxygen where people aren't going to smoke because that's just something humans do.
yeah. I love that. That, like you say, it's sort of when you get these futuristic films, but they're very much a future representation of the time in which they're made, which is always going to be the case. But like you say, this is clearly like this. This is like the late 70s, early 80s in 150 years. um. So yeah, I get what you mean. But it is weird. Like they want to show um an industrial aesthetic. They want to show this griminess, this sort of this mining. Um, I'm trying to think. There's almost like there's a dichotomy between the claustrophobia they keep wanting to try and highlight, but then this space age technology that they keep wanting to introduce as well.
Mhm.
And it is interesting how they sort of have these different things. Like they're trying not to go full Star Wars or full Star Trek. Like they want to show this to be thing, but they don't want it to be shown to be unsophisticated.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a sort of there's a struggle, isn't there? Because you're right. There's areas where you do go. I'm not sure what this space is for. Like it seems big. I'm not entirely sure this would be how it would be, but aesthetically, it looks it all works for me. I have to admit. But like you
Mm.
say, the one thing, and we'll bring this round back to Sean Connery's family shortly, is the habitat. Because they have this sort of because you never see the bedroom. You see sort of like there's a living area, which is probably closer to the quarters you see on Red Dwarf.
Mhm.
But then when you see like the doctor's surgery, it's all white and it seems a lot cleaner. And I am thinking like, how is it that the doctor's surgeries all seems quite like you say luxurious and that sophistication, yet they can't do wallpaper and sort of solid walls for the living habitats.
Mhm.
It seems all very
Mhm.
sort of choices were made to give it that thing. But I also understand that it's supposed to be this struggle of the living environment that pushes the wife away. So I get why it's there
Mhm.
for that purpose. Excuse me, for that purpose as well.
Well, and I think it's like you say that there's this struggle between wanting to portray that sort of working class, um, alien-like, future, but
Mm,
also still trying to, yeah, have let the set designers have fun. Clearly that sort of bar, strip club, whorehouse, they had fun making that, and they've
yeah,
got the laser lights and stuff, and it looks really cool. Um, it also looks like like I can't imagine them devoting the space, um, to this. We don't send soldiers out into the field and say, well, they're definitely going to need prostitutes. We're gonna ship prostitutes with them. I mean,
no. But
you know,
again, I think one of the things is this mining facility. This is clearly this is a Western in space, as you've said, and so they are trying to sort of represent. They're trying to represent a mining, like a Western mining town in
yeah,
space. So
good point. Right.
they are trying to sort of like replicate that. That's a saloon, isn't it? That's where the sort of like the showdown's going to be between the sheriff and the sort of the main villain sort of thing. So they're trying to have those sort of tropes and stuff in there as well. And so I sort of get, but I also kind of like the fact that um, Peter Boyle's character, the general manager, they're his. Like he knows that because he refers to them later on as his prostitutes. He says like
Mm-hmm.
he says well they're my women. They're mostly clean. They're mostly sort of whatever. Like he knows
He
that
says
there's
he says like they're mostly clean, and some of them are even attractive.
yes that's it yeah. And
It's
so
not a
there's
bad line.
no and there's an acknowledgement of like there needs to be a release valve for some of these people, and so this is how we facilitate it. Like, so it's not just a sort of a working place. Like, they recognize that there's got to be this sort of like, and again, I think this comes down to a feel for the time. Yes, they're trying to do a Western in space, but this very much again feels like that sort of like grimy 70s, early 80s aesthetic, sort of like, which again I actually really dig. It's something I'm sort of I kind of like as a sort of a feel. But let's talk
Right.
about
So let's talk about Sean Connery. Yeah,
yes.
I mean, he is this may be one of the most Sean Connery performances that Sean Connery delivers of all time. And he is so obviously himself in so many movies, right? Where he's clearly just phoning it in. I mean, I don't think anyone thought that he took acting seriously.
Mm.
I mean, he's always been Sean Connery in everything to a degree. But that famous quote from Sean Connery, who died recently, but that famous quote of him saying in an interview, like, "Well, of course I've smacked women around, only when they deserved it."
Mm.
And there were he certainly had that attitude and got in trouble sometimes for saying these things and acting this macho way on set. And here, I don't know, like how this, obviously it was okay at the time in a way that isn't now, but still you think, like you said, maybe that's an ad lib line. I mean, it's a good line, right? I mean, the
Mm.
doctor's saying like, well, that's a doctor joke, and she's sort of saying, well, I'm not going to do this quickly. You've got to deal with me. You're in my territory now. And then he says, maybe I'll smack you around the room. That's a Marshall joke. Um, which it's not a bad line, especially in a Western, especially if it were a male doctor. You'd think nothing of it. I mean, it's threatened violence, but we're used to violence being threatened to men.
Yeah, but I would say one of the things I actually think is the woman they've got playing
We're,
Frances
we're not going to
Sternhagen.
spend the next 30 minutes defending Sean Connery.
No. What I would say is that no, because you say about sort of female dictator, but I like this is the thing where I actually want to give credit to Frances Sternhagen as Dr. Marlon Lazarus, because her response is not a sort of ooh. She sort of smirks at him, like she's a sort of like she's used to dealing with these overly macho burly men, so she sort of takes it in a stride as if to say like the response she gives is, yeah, you're just as bad as all the rest of them. Like, she's heard all this before. You don't scare her. Like, she's not intimidated. So I think she's a great character actually in all of this.
I agree.
So
And to the end, I mean, she's tough.
mm,
She also is not feminized. Like,
mm,
she isn't shot in a way that is uh, unattractive or masculinizing or anything. But she's not played as a sex figure. She's not a
no,
love interest. And there are some shots, especially at the end, where she comes into action, where it's like, oh no, she's not defined by her gender, and she's not shot in a way that's defined by her gender in a way that I thought was pretty progressive.
yeah, like this could the character Dr. Lazarus could easily be played by a male as much as a female, and I like the fact that she is, and again, she knows her. This sounds really bad, but she knows her position in the whole structure of things. Like you say, she's like, look, if I was a really good doctor, I wouldn't have been sent to this crap hole on this mining colony. Like, she knows that sort of like where her skill sets is, but she's used to dealing with these people. And so yeah, she feels like that. Often when you have these characters, and again, like even when they're trying to be progressive, they end up having a sort of a character that's sort of either overly um, tough, I've survived in
Yeah.
this sort of thing, or cynical, or they try and make them as in sort of like the beauty, the rose amongst
Mm.
the thorns kind of thing. But with her,
Mhm.
she's just like, no, I work in a mining colony. I've had to deal with it. Like, same shit, different day kind of thing. And I like that sort of like her attitude. I think she's a really good presence in this whole film. So that's why that line to me works, where he's
Yeah.
trying to give a little bit of intimidation, but it completely deflects off her. Like, but yeah, you're right
Yeah,
about
it's
Sean
almost
Connery.
like, she won't allow that comment to be as gendered as we perceive it to be.
Exactly, yeah. But you are right about Sean Connery coming to this film, and I was curious. So there's nothing really from behind the scenes to say like he was invested in this or whatever. Like he didn't, but he is very sort of like he's fine, and I like his presence. I think he's got a good
Hmm.
charisma. He's got good presence. But there are clearly scenes where he's more invested than others. I think at times, um, and I think about sort of like his response to um, other films that he was offered
Hmm.
and did. Like he was at one point, he was offered the opportunity to be Gandalf in Lord of the Rings,
Hmm.
and also obviously he was Ramirez in Highlander, and he took Ramirez because he was like, yeah, it paid well, like that was it. Like he read the script, was like, I didn't
Yeah.
understand it, and his response to Lord of the Rings was like, I did understand it, but it was, and I get the feeling with this where he sort of read it and gone like, yeah, I sort of get it, but I'm not interested in doing this science fiction shit, so I'm just going to take the paycheck.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, but I think that when was that not true for Sean Connery? I mean,
That's probably true. Yeah.
maybe Doctor No. I mean, you know, but seriously, but like by the time you're a couple films into James Bond, he's like, I'm being underpaid. Fuck these guys, and has publicly said it.
Mm.
Um, so it's sort of like, look, I tried early on. I helped make an amazing franchise. Basically, 4 years into my acting career, I had accomplished more than I ever thought I would. From then on, I was about getting money for what I had done in this 4 years.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of true.
Mm.
But having said that, you're right that he does sort of laconically walk through the whole film. But then that's also so much of like, I mean, when we've talked about Clint Eastwood,
Yes.
um, he does the same thing. I mean, a lot of these sort of like emotionless kind of tough guys, um, that's their shtick, is not acting, basically.
No, but you're right in saying that. I think this performance, and I even think like even the director Peter Hyams is going for that. Like this clearly is okay. We're not going full Dirty Harry, but we're looking for a Western hero kind of trope. Like we're looking for, you know, I mean, this is clearly reaching back to the sort of the heyday of the Western. Like they're looking for those sorts of characters, and that's what he's supposed to be. Um, I mean, this isn't it. I get the feeling like if they could have made him a drunk
Mm.
that was
Hmm.
recovering and it was like a redemption story, they would have done. Like it feels like that would have been the next step. That would have been probably a cliche too far. Um,
So you're saying that's why they couldn't?
no, I think there was a choice not to, but I could easily see that he was sent here because of a disgrace. Like to me, that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the easy answer, he was sent to this moon because of a cock up because he was a drunk and he's looking to redeem himself, and that's his arc for being so committed to this. But they didn't go there. But I could easily see that just because I've seen that in westerns, like you've seen that
Hmm.
so often. So, um, but I feel like you say Clint Eastwood, Gene Hackman, those like say 70s performances is what this is going for. So yeah, I definitely see that.
Yeah. I mean, I found myself also thinking about, what I think was less apt comparison, but also thinking about Chinatown and,
Mm,
Nicholson's performance there is, of course, he's playing a very different character. And it's a much more nuanced, brilliant performance. Um, but that also has the same sense of like, oh, it's corrupt, can't change it. There, of course, it's a detective story, not a western. Here, the detective story is done halfway through, and I think it deteriorates once it's done, and it becomes the inevitable sort of person on person, big bad kind of conclusion there. But I did find myself thinking of the in a positive sense. I mean it as a compliment. The sort of lostness of Nicholson in Chinatown.
mm. Yeah, no, I think because that is actually a rather, it's another great. It's a great film that sort of with a great performance. Um, but like Nicholson's character in that is another one that sort of he gets caught up in that whole sort of case and stuff, and he gets away from him, doesn't it? That's the sort of one of the points in that. Sort of like he barely sort of makes the case, and actually he doesn't win in the end. Like the end of the film actually is sort of like there's a sort of a loss at the end of the film. No spoilers. Go watch Chinatown. It's a great film.
Yeah.
But one of the things is like with this character is like there's the character, like you say, the thing is, I say, a lot of those other characters get beaten up and get sort of injured, like you say, even like say Nicholson in Chinatown, or like James Stewart in some of these films, or Cary Grant, or whatever you want to say. One of the things I found, the one things I would say is a detraction for this film is there's still there's almost like an invulnerability to the Sean Connery character in this. There's a toughness that sort of is a bit like, yeah, I get it, but like, it never feels like he's not gonna win, sort of thing.
That's true. Doesn't he get shot?
He does, and there's a couple of fights that are quite good in that sense of sort of like but I think maybe it's because of the way Sean Connery's playing it. Like he never feels like he's been. There's a scene
he's
where
not Bruce Willis in Die Hard,
Exactly, like he's not. Yeah, he's not being worn down by this. And this I think maybe comes to the sort of the level of performance he's given at times. But like the his approach at the sort of the 30-minute mark is the same approach at like the 1 hour 15 mark. You know what I mean? Like he's been through several fights. He never feels like just to give it, we're going to talk about it. The end of the film is him being alone. Like he's supposed to be standing alone against these people that are coming to kill him. That's sort of the climax. He has the support from the doctor, but he's still that laconic sort of, he's supposed to be he sends a message to his family and all this other stuff. And, it's supposed to feel desperate. It's supposed to feel sort of like he's isolated and alone and trapped. But he never sort of gives that performance. It never feels desperate. It just feels sort of like grumpy, and that's it. And so,
well, don't forget the black officer does support him too at the end, briefly.
Yeah, briefly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you're right. There is no tension, and in fact, I think there are all these narrative signs that we're supposed to think that he is not going to survive, right? That he's facing the fight of his life, and the odds are against him. But as he's waiting that 60 hours for the transport to arrive and sort of blowing time and getting drunk with the doctor and things like this, he's often just sort of waiting. And I find myself thinking, oh, he's looking forward to this. I mean, I found myself thinking, like, first of all, why does he not just arrest the guy? He's got all the evidence.
Yes.
Arrest the guy immediately. There's no point. Like, why would you? I mean, he doesn't ever arrest the guy. He punches him and says the case is over. But the implication is at the end that he has arrested the guy and he's got his man. You had the same evidence 60 hours ago. Why not just arrest him? And then the 3 guy assassins come and, well, you could just detain everybody on the ship. I mean, I don't know.
No, I'm glad you said it. 'Cause one of the things I was curious about was the way that the ending sort of pans out, because I was very much like, I thought the same. Like he has this conversation, like he's had an open conversation with Peter Boyle about it. Like they clearly know each other's position. Like Sean Connery's characters. He's found the drugs. He's actually destroyed a whole bunch of them, and he goes and confronts Peter Boyle, and Boyle's like, "Oh well, that's annoying." We're taking this, so we're going down that route. Are you sure you want to go down this route? And they both sort of have this sort of like, like a macho sort of standoff. But he's got the evidence and he's admitted it. And so we're going to like arrest him. All right, so you're going to arrest him, and the end of the film is going to be the corporation sending these people in to bust him out and to kill the marshal. That's what I was expecting. And he's having to defend the jail or something like that so he can process the crime or get it through to whoever. But it's not. And I was a bit like, oh, so what's he doing? Like, I don't understand. This showdown almost seems a bit pointless. Not pointless, but like, I don't know.
As usual, right? I mean,
yeah,
these big fights at the end, usually this is their risk, is in trying to create drama. There are three assassins coming, the odds are against him. He has to take one down and then two down and three down.
yeah.
And I will say the film comes up with inventive ways of doing that. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, yeah. It's fun.
I was really dreading it because I'm like, why does he not just arrest this guy? As you say, he's clearly guilty. You've got all the evidence. He's actually threatened to kill you.
Yeah.
Like,
well, not just threatened. Like, he has a recording of it. He literally has a recording of the phone call to the corporation saying, "Oh, can you send these guys down to kill him?" The film that crossed my mind, and it actually sort of sent me down a little bit of a thought pattern when I was watching this end piece, because I thought about this, was like, well, what's the end game of this? Because he doesn't so much arrest someone. And talking about Clint Eastwood, have you seen the film The Gauntlet?
No.
Okay, so The Gauntlet is a 1970s Clint Eastwood film. It's really good, actually. I actually really enjoy it. It's got Sandra Luck in it as well. And the idea is that Sandra Luck is a prostitute, but she's a witness to a murder. And so Clint Eastwood has got to get her to this courtroom so she can testify. And it turns out, spoilers, it turns out that the people that were involved in this mob hit and this killing were also one of his superiors and all this other stuff. So he's got to sort of across this gauntlet of the police to get to the courthouse. So you get the sort of, it's a fun film. It's a bit more actiony and a bit silly, but the point of it is, like, he's got this destination to get to. Like, if he fails, this case falls apart, and this killer and also this the corruption will continue. Like, and again, it is a redemption story. He's a drunk and all this other stuff. But you get at the end of the film, he delivers her to the courthouse to give her testimony. Do you know what I mean? That's the point. Like, that's the success of the story. Like, he's able to close the case because she's able to give evidence. And again, as we often say with these films, like, oh, there's clearly a follow-up to this. Like, we know, but like, you feel that, like, the objective is served. Like, that was his mission. It allows the sort of the case to be progressed, so on and so forth. With this one, like you say, I was almost like, if this was a Western, you'd be waiting, like, the sheriff would have taken the person to jail, and then the final point would be like, they have to stay in jail for this amount of time for this marshal or whoever, this judge, to arrive in town for us to complete the prosecution. Like, that's what he's defending. Like, if he escapes, I can't complete the prosecution, so I've got to, justice has got to be served, kind of thing. There's no end goal. There's no objective to why he's actually standing up to these people. So whenever they confront him about, I've got to be a good man, I keep thinking to myself, how have you proven you're a good man? Because all you technically have done so far is kill people on this and starved these people on a mining colony without actually prosecuting anybody. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I find myself wondering, I mean, if he did arrest him, you say, like, maybe the colony, maybe his bosses sent the three guys anyway. Well, they've clearly said, if he gets arrested and it doesn't work, he's disposable, right? We've heard that conversation. It seems to me, what happens, I mean, this movie should end 30 minutes early with, Sean Connery just arrests him. He's sent off on that shuttle. The three guys are like, what do we do now?
A new general manager sent down. That's it.
Right, and maybe they call in and they're told, don't do anything. And so the guy sent back, he mysteriously dies on the shuttle, and he can't hold trial. None of this is ever going to become public. The powers that be are protected. And forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. But instead, we have to have the macho Western finale. And I think it's there that, although they do a bang-up job of inventing, ways to envision those fights in space, much as the best sort of Westerns did, where you're like, oh, I mean, the good, the bad, and the ugly, metal plating and all this stuff. And, I mean, the best Westerns did have a sense of flair and, showing you something that you hadn't seen before. And I think this takes that to the next level. And kudos for doing it. But all of it is totally unnecessary. And I found myself sort of half tuning out because of that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that there is that element to it. Of, like you say, that it sort of becomes a little bit. It's good to see, and I enjoy some of the sort of the showdowny bit. but it's almost superfluous. Like it doesn't serve a purpose. So I'm a bit like, okay, so what's the point of this? I almost would like that, prefer the ending actually, of like, you can still have the showdown, you can still have all these bits and pieces, you could succeed and then just see that it carries on, and like someone actually saying to him like, look, you may have proven to yourself that you're a good man, but you have not changed the way the machine works.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Now,
I think,
and also not help these miners.
mm,
I mean, they don't have a greenhouse for one thing.
yeah,
Um, Also, have you seen miners? Like, remember how the coal miners in the United States were really mad that Hillary Clinton said mines aren't coming back, but we will pay to retrain you at the government's expense. And
mm,
they said, you know, this mine is going to come back. We're going to vote for Donald Trump, right? I mean, you know, coal miners, miners don't always vote their interests, is my point.
no,
And my guess is a lot of these miners would be like, yeah, this drug lets us be productive. And those guys went crazy because they didn't have enough fortitude.
yeah,
I have the fortitude, and anyway, even if I die, I chose this.
yeah. I think that there, again, like, there's more. There could be so much more done with this film if you want to really dig into the politics of this kind of thing. Like, you could be making statements about all this kind of stuff, about ecology and about sort of, like you say, sort of working class politics, and like you say, voting against your own favor. But also sort of like, you could always make statements about the futility of the police in these environments as well. Sort of like, yeah, you're there to sort of keep the peace, but you're not there to enforce the law. Let's be clear. And that's sort of in there a little bit. Like I'm saying, that's sort of where it's sort of, you learn when they have that sort of that scene where they are reporting back on the crimes and stuff that they've dealt with. It's more peacekeeping than law enforcement. And so I like the fact that some of that's in here, but like you say, it sort of does sort of devolve into shooty, punchy, unfortunately. But I still like a lot of what this film does. And I feel that there's sort of some great scenes. And again, some of the cast are so good. Even sort of Connor obviously has that laconic sort of thing, but like, it is sort of it's made better by that sort of supporting cast, I think, that sort of really help him. But I just wish the structure would have worked better for that finale of giving it a bit more of a sort of. One of the things you say, we have a recording of Peter Boyle's character sort of confessing that he's going to basically get three guys to come down and kill the marshal, as well as admitting to all this drug sort of like, passing it out to the miners. All right, you've now got that data, but let's say here's a scenario: you can't, we haven't got the technology to actually digitally pass that information to Earth, so it's got to be carried. So he has to protect the data disk or whatever it is that's got to do that. They want to destroy that because they want to cover this up. Like, give the fight more of a purpose than he's a pain in the ass and I want him dead. It's sort of, I don't know, it needs more tension for that last third.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it needs more stakes for the protagonist. And part of the problem there, as you say, is we have an actor who's not willing to sell that. So it's pretty hard to do that. I like what you're saying about policing. This difference between keeping the peace and enforcing the law. And sort of keeping the peace is kind of understood as the status quo, right? If miners get into a fight and they start hitting each other at the bar, that's my job to deal with. It's not my job to fix society's problems. It's not my job to go into, Exxon Tower and arrest the CEO for polluting. You guys figure that stuff out. In the meantime, I'm here to arrest people for jaywalking and brandishing guns in gas stations. That gets at some deep stuff. I'm not convinced, though. Like, I'm not convinced of the protagonist's motivations. I don't know. Like, I like this story. I like what it's trying to do, but it seems to me that we don't know why he's kind of exiled to the mining company in the first place. That, I mean, and let's just establish this long beginning and this ending are pretty awful with this text on the screen with bad punctuation and but we don't know exactly what he's done to get exiled to Io. But his wife is going to take his child to back to Earth, which he's never seen. Obviously he's at a juncture point. I don't know, I mean, there's some issues here that I have like with gravity and like, I mean, that is consistent in this movie. Like, gravity sort of sometimes is normal and sometimes isn't. And okay, you've got budgetary restraints. I don't know a kid raised not in Earth gravity, how he's going to function when he gets back to Earth, but that's not important. What's important is the character's emotional arc. But it seems to me that really it's a very sort of Clint Eastwood-esque kind of, all right, my wife doesn't want to do what I say, so I'm going to throw a hissy fit and go off and fix this town and risk my own life over and over again. And at the end say, I've gone on a hero's journey, and now I've proven to myself that I'm a good man, and I'm going to rejoin my family, and I've earned the ability or the right to just basically be a human being, which actually sounds like really self-indulgent and terrible behavior to me.
Oh, it is. I mean, you are totally right, because this thing, it tries to portray this idea of like self-respect, doesn't it? This idea of being able to look at yourself in the mirror and be, see yourself as the man you should be. That's all this is. It's overly macho. Like his wife's actually even like confronts him and she's like, "We've got tickets. We're leaving. Are you coming with us or not?" And he says like, "No, I can't. I've got to stay and do this." And she's going like, "Why?" Like, and he can't sort of have like, he can't sort of give her an answer, and he ends up sort of explaining to the doctor later on in a conversation about being. It's almost that thing of being a good man, sort of like, what is it to be a good person? Sort of like they think I'm a washout. They think I'm this kind of pain in the ass, but like I need to prove to myself that I'm this good person. But like you say, the problem is we're not ever really given a solid backstory that says, this is why he's this washout. This is why they think he's going to be a pushover. I mean, I think you mentioned Die Hard before, but one of those things that we've seen these characters, because we've seen these characters before. Was he a drunk? And that's the usual easy get out that he was a drunk and they made a mistake. The character of Al Powell in Die Hard, like he accidentally shot a kid, so he became a desk cop, and so but then he sort of he hasn't pulled his gun for however many years, and then eventually he pulls it to save John McClane at the end and all this other stuff. Like, you need at least that backstory so that they can work against it. Like, again, the same with like the Gauntlet. Like the reason that the Clint Eastwood character in the Gauntlet is chosen is because he's a sloppy cop. Like he's the anti. The reason Clint wanted to do it is because he's the anti Harry Callahan. Like he's the anti Dirty Harry. He's like he's a sloppy cop. He doesn't really take it seriously. So of course he's going to fail. So he's got to. You are given that information in the film. And it's the same as all these things. You need that backstory for him to be sort of like working against first to care about. Otherwise, it's like half an arc. He starts halfway through it, and you're like, oh, all right, well, he finishes it. Like, but where's the start point? Where's that moment of him like struggling to sort of like take even like Deckard in Blade Runner. That thing of feeling like washed out and pointless and all this other stuff. Like, you get that information. You need that scene of him. I know this again is cliche, but that thing where they pour a drink and it's sort of like, am I going to give in to temptation or am I going to stand up? And then they push it aside. You need all that stuff, like, and it's not there. You just sort of like, it's bizarre.
Well, the other thing is, it's not there in Sean Connery. I mean, for me,
no.
like, look, I don't know that Blade Runner has an arc, frankly, for Deckard, but you do feel that he's washed out just from the performance and from the direction. You don't need to be told, all of that. You get a sense of who a character is. Here, Sean Connery is a uh, take no prisoners kind of guy from the moment he arrives. You know, he's a just like super blunt macho dude. He's that sheriff from the moment he shows up, and so it's not like he has been somebody else. It's impossible to imagine him having been somebody else. When he had nothing to
Yep.
gain by being a badass, guy. Yeah, to what he was presenting himself and introducing himself around the ship and talking to the doctor and all those things. He has everything to lose by being a macho, arrogant prick. And he's a macho, arrogant prick.
Yeah.
He's clearly just a macho, arrogant prick. This is not like, I got a raw deal and my wife doesn't want to do what I tell her to do. And so I'm gonna, have a Breaking Bad moment or a, falling down moment.
This is why.
Good film, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. But I was gonna say, and this is, I think, is because I think you mentioned like Falling Down or and those other films. Like you need that snapping point to say what's from one persona to the next or one sort of like state to the next. This to me is exemplified in this film by a very awkward scene later on of him talking with his wife and son, especially him talking with his son. I mean, the child actor they've got to play the son isn't fantastic. It's all a bit wooden. But like at one point, you got Sean Connery going like, and give him a kiss for me. And I'm like, I don't believe anything you're saying at this point. Like, you've clearly slapped that child around. Like, it's clear. Like, I don't believe that you're not showing me remorse or regret that you're letting your family go and you care for his family. Like, he is the weakest link in this film. Like, that's the problem.
Yeah. No, I find myself wondering in that scene, like, this should feel like you are saying goodbye to them.
Yes.
Right? Like you fully expect there's a good chance I will never talk to you again. Right. And at no point does he communicate. Like this is that pathos conversation, right? Of like, what I'm not saying is this is the last time I'll talk to you, but I can't bring myself to say that. That should be the undertone of all of it. And Connery just cannot communicate that.
No, this is that scene of like, and again, like I say, this film, although setting it in space and I love the aesthetic, isn't unique. This is not an original story. We've seen this trope 100 times. And this is why I think like, James Stewart works so well in some of these roles in those westerns. The Man Who Killed Liberty Valance and all these other characters, because he is that sort of almost like Tom Hanks. When you see Tom Hanks in like Road to Perdition or some of these other films, and you go, "Oh, that's Tom Hanks," and then he becomes something else, and you're like, "Oh shit!" Like Tom Hanks in like Saving Private Ryan. When you see him do that transition to doing something a bit different, like it works. Same with James Stewart, and like I say, Sean Connery can't do that. And so I do feel like that. Yeah, even Bruce Willis, like you said, mentioned in Die Hard, and he's done other films, but like the scene when he's obviously his feet are all cut up, and he's having that conversation where he's like. He's realizing like, yeah, this has gone wrong. Like, I'm not getting out of this. Like, I've done what I can. I probably shouldn't have done it, sort of thing. Like, it's that, like you say, that last stance, isn't it? Sort of like, look, the next thing I do is probably going to kill me, so I'm saying goodbye. I don't know. Yeah,
absolutely. But then you get later Bruce Willis, who is totally Sean Connery and totally like. How do we pump this up? How do we make this more badass?
Well, the thing is, unfortunately, I think some of the actors, now let's ignoring James Stewart, because I think James Stewart was always great, but even Harrison Ford is the same. Like you watch some of Harrison Ford sort of like 80s and 90s performances, they're fantastic. They are. He's got that pathos, and he can do that with some of these characters. Even like his Jack Ryan in some of the films he did, that sort of thing. Later Harrison Ford clearly doesn't care and just sort of coasts through everything. So there is that thing of like, could this have worked better with I don't know, an actor that could have given that pathos, who you'd have felt like, oh yeah, no, he's off to die for a reason.
Yeah, and thinking about one of the reasons I thought about Chinatown was I kept thinking, God, I would love to see Nicholson in this role. As obviously, famous as Sean Connery is, I'm not a Sean Connery hater by any means. I mean, it's hard not to like the guy on screen. He's got a certain charisma. I grew up watching him. But I did wonder, somebody who was sort of more obviously capable of being slimy, an actor who goes for it and isn't afraid to be vulnerable or slimy or something like that, could have really had, sunk their teeth into this. And lots of actors could do that.
Oh yeah, I mean again, like Gene Hackman.
Hmm.
You could see the same because even with Sean Connery, like you can see where Sean Connery is willing to do things like that's because I would say even like Highlander, although it's sort of like he acknowledges how he thinks that film's silly and it's not his favorite, like he knew it was silly and so he gives it sort of like a real sort of like campy flair. But if you watch The Untouchables, like where he plays like a macho Irish cop with the Scottish accent, um, he manages to sort of give more to that role because I think he sees it as going like, well, that's I'm enjoying this role. Like this, he's able to start. The director is able to get more from him. So I put this at Sean Connery's feet, but I also put it at Peter Hyams' feet as well to say like this should have been someone going no look Sean, this is what I want. Like really sort of lean into this. This is what we want to get. But yeah, I don't know. Someone sort of maybe slightly younger, someone who could have given that pathos of saying like, this is.
Well, I mean, just here's a scene of this weighing on me,
Yeah.
right? I mean, here's the scene where I'm saying goodbye to my wife and son. Like, I mean, maybe play it like that, Sean.
Yeah.
Maybe play it like what it's scripted as.
Yeah. Read the words and give them emotion. Don't just read the words of.
Yeah, exactly. Like, consider the context in the story. That seems to be utterly missing here. But he does seem to really enjoy being a badass.
He's clearly enjoying. Yeah,
those moments are great.
Yeah, whenever he gets to have like that sort of, like he delivers one of those sort of snarky lines, or he's punching someone out, or even like he's enjoying the third act more than anybody else. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah. Well, he even gets to say "think it over," and he doesn't add the word "creep." But I mean, he gets the RoboCop line in.
Yeah, like he's looking to be that macho character, and I think that's where it's sort of. But you need it's weird how like you need that vulnerability in order for those scenes to have the impact, and because he's not willing to do that vulnerability, they have less impact. Which is where I think, like you say, you start to realize and go, oh, that's why some of those action films or some of those more actiony cop dramas worked, is because like you had that vulnerability on display.
There's a movie, Year of the Dragon. I think it's Michael Camino, Oliver Stone script. It's about a new sheriff, right, in Chinatown, right, trying to clean it up, and he goes against the triads, and it's been accused of being racist and all this stuff, and I'm not defending it from that perspective, but it shows, people say like, why are you doing this? This is a death sentence, and he's a drunk. He's he doesn't know why he's doing it. He's it's Mickey Rourke, right? He's just Mickey Rourke. He's kind of an asshole, and I don't know why I'm doing it. Maybe I just don't like being pushed around anymore, and that's something Sean Connery can't even allow himself to do that.
Well, even those sort of like those, you say that we're going back to those sort of Sam Spade kind of private eye things where you're sort of like, why not just drop the case? I mean, that goes back to Chinatown. It's a similar thing, isn't it? Sort of like you're getting beaten up by guys. Well, why? Well, I say I just don't like to be pushed around. Like sort of, I can't let this go anymore. It's a matter of macho honor kind of thing. Like, but at least you have that motivation or something. Even like you say, even Clint Eastwood in A Fistful of Dollars, or even Mifune in Yojimbo. Like you get to that point where you sort of go, walk away, and they're like, oh, I can't. It's a matter of like principle now. It's a matter of sort of like it's personal kind of thing. But you feel that with those characters where you don't with this one character, which I think you're right. This is the weakness of this film.
But I mean, to get to your point about sort of like you get half an arc, that seems to be really clear and really key, because with Yojimbo and with The Man with No Name, you don't know anything about the backstory.
No,
you sort of therefore can imagine what you want.
Mm.
And so it's easy to think of a Ronin who, you know,
Disgraced or whatever, or yeah.
yeah, and who idolizes the better days when, he
Mm.
stood for something and has very little to live um, for himself. And, similarly, it's easy to imagine the man with no name, having been through hard times and not really caring whether he lives or dies. Probably
Mm.
thought he was going to die from, 20 times a year from the time he was 16 on.
Yeah.
Uh, that's how I imagine it. But we can't imagine that. Here we're given just enough that we need more for it to make sense,
Hmm.
right? We're given the family. We're given this as a new mission to an undesirable outpost. Why are you getting that? Why are you abandoning your family at this key time? you
Yeah.
know, we're given just enough for it not to make sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's a line. He has a conversation with his wife, and she's already sort of like, unhappy. And he says like, "Well, we've only been here 2 weeks. It'll get better." And but there's no response where she's like, "But you've said that the last 10 times, and they always end up the same way, whatever."
Mm-hmm.
Or you said that in the last place, and look what happened. And you're like, "Well, what happened?" But there's nothing like that. Like it's just she just sort of goes, "All right," and then leaves. So even the wife's story is incomplete enough to be sort of like going, oh, well, what's motivating you from the past to be that you're making this decision to walk away from your husband with your child? Like, what's you
Mm-hmm.
know, because the message she leaves clearly this wasn't an easy decision. So why? What's motivating it? I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, I don't get it either, but I do think it's well done. I like that
Mm,
message of sort of goodbye, saying I love how it's repeated. It's almost Blade Runner-esque how it's sort of
yes.
repeated in the background in this haunting way. Um, and I love the message of sort of like I didn't have the courage to do this in person.
Mm,
It might be you could argue it's a misogynistic message, right? Women don't have courage. Look how she's a coward in an already misogynist movie. I wouldn't go there. I could see that reading, but I wouldn't go there. I think it's a powerful message about how we all, sometimes don't want to be corrected. We don't
mm,
want to lose our strength in the moment. And I think that, it's beautifully done. My biggest complaint is then that final thing, besides, as you point out, the lack of correct emotions for saying goodbye to your family, is why is it live? It's, until then, I found myself thinking one of the reasons why, you know, why this is on tape is because, um, there's a time delay
mm,
from Io to wherever the hell she is. It's not Earth, but somewhere else in the solar system. And then they're just live as if they're next door to each other. And I thought, oh, I thought that there was a kind of serious science fiction aspect to that emotional decision that struck me in a really cool sort of like Solaris kind of like, oh, that's smart kind of way. And then it's like, oh no, you didn't mean it like
pull
that,
it
did you?
away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's certain things in this when they don't give certain consideration to like that. They're not going for the full hard science fiction considerations of what it would be to be leaving a moon of Jupiter to go sort of be on another moon of Jupiter, or even to be on the other side of that moon, wherever. Like, I don't know. It's go.
Smoking in space.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, let's leave it at that. Um, but you are right. One of the weird things I think we sort of get into the nub of this is because I've been picky on this film. I really enjoy this film. I do, in many ways, but because of the aesthetic, because I think I like the pacing. I think it has that sort of like Private Eye, that sort of 70s sort of cop pacing. But the other thing is as well is like you say, it's unfortunately not a great film. It's an enjoyable film, but it's not a really good film or a great film because it never sort of sat, or you say if you was, they never really sat down and went, what is the purpose, or what is this, what is that? Like it keeps getting to places where it's like, oh, I like that, but it's not great. Like there are scenes where I go, I really like that, and then the next one's a bit weak. Like there's a conversation. I really like the conversation where he knows that his second in command is obviously involved in this and been making money. They're playing squash.
Yeah.
and he's like, and they have a conversation like, and he's like, they literally they're having this open conversation about it, and he says, "Oh, are you going to take me down?" And he's like, "No, I want you to almost like to do what you're doing now. I want you to turn a blind eye to what I'm going to do. Do what you do best. Turn a blind eye." And they carry on playing, and it's sort of like it's just there's a It's one of the few scenes where there's a legit tension. And I really enjoy that scene where it's sort of like these two colleagues that, like, the person that Sean Connery was supposed to trust and was there sort of as his sort of like, to get him into this community, and he's having to confront him, but they do it in a sort of like there's almost like a lack of machoism there. It's just two guys sort of talking. It doesn't degenerate into a fight. It doesn't degenerate into an argument. It's just a discussion, and I love that scene. And there's several scenes like that. Again, like the conversation with Peter Boyle and stuff, where Boyle is laying out how all this works, and he's sort of saying like, you are a cog in this. Like, don't think you're anything else. And there's these really great scenes, but then it keeps sort of slipping back to things. And again, it's where I'm like, Sean Connery's the weak link in this. Like, if you had somebody else, this could be fantastic.
Well, I found myself thinking, and I agree with you about Sean Connery, but I found myself thinking, vis-a-vis what you're saying, that while I was watching it, I was really troubled by or perplexed by this idea about how it not being about anything. And I think that, I am kind of a sucker for movies being about something. I want, sure, have all the action in the world, but have that underlying theme, right? It's Chris Nolan. Yeah, okay, it's a bunch of guys shooting each other, but it's about X, Y, and Z, right? And obviously that could be more obvious in your face or more subtle. And then sometimes there are films that are good that just aren't about anything. And I think that those tend to be much more forgettable for me.
Yeah.
I think, for example, The Untouchables is a totally forgettable movie. I think it amounts to absolutely nothing. And it's well done, I think there are a lot of spy movies that are just excellent maneuvers by smart people back and forth. And I think, oh, this is all very well done. I really enjoyed this. It's an excellent spy movie. And I'm never going to think about it again. Because it doesn't get at, how corrupt that system is, or, it's just a movie about, people doing things. And I think that this feels more like a movie that doesn't know that it could be about stuff. Like it has, like, Alien feels more like it's aware that it's a condemnation of corporate culture. This movie doesn't seem to know that in the same way, or it isn't interested in somebody writing a thesis about that. If that makes sense.
No, I agree. This film is more interested in being a Western in space than actually being than using that framing device to then make a statement or to do anything about it. And I think you're right. I 100% agree. Like, there's almost like this implied like thing around corporate greed and the disposability of staff and resource, but it's never sort of like addressed in any sort of like specific way. And especially considering sort of like, coming out in 81, like the 70s was especially in this country, but I don't know if it's the same in the States, but like we were being run rampant by like union disquiet and strikes and all this other stuff. Like, yeah, like this film should have hit home in a really, and also like, Thatcher coming into power and the mining communities of North England and Wales sort of closing down and coming to an end and fighting for their survival. Like, this film should feel like it's hitting home. Like, get a British director on this, and this probably would have been, really sort of like, could have been about something. And it never, but it's more about, it still wants to be that macho Western. It's looking to do that rather than, like you say. So I think that's disappointing. And that's part of the problem, is it never feels like it's actually about anything in particular.
Well, and you're right. Get a British director at that time, and it would have been very different. I mean, we don't have that same history. And unfortunately, we are still attached to this Ayn Randian idea of this, this lone individual who comes into town. And that's part of the Western myth, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's there in Star Trek. It's there in Star Wars. I mean, it's inscribed in fairy tales and King Arthur and all of that stuff. It's not all bad,
Mm-mm.
but but for a movie that is about exposing a conspiracy to abuse workers in a mine, there's never like a shot of a miner suffering or looking, we see somebody shooting up with a drug when we don't know what it is yet, but we don't really see why he's doing it. We don't see minors talk to their kids. We don't see any sort of class consciousness. The camera doesn't care about the minors.
Mm.
The script the plot might imply that they're being treated as disposable, but the camera doesn't give a shit.
Well, one of the weird things, because one of the to get to that point, one of the things I do like about this, that I really like about this film, is the fact that it sort of highlights how dangerous this mining is. You see two deaths in particular. Well, you see multiple deaths, but like this thing of them mining in a sort of like in space, like out on the surface of this moon. And the first one is the opening of the film, and you get this guy who's been driven crazy by this drug, and it's all very sort of, it's a little bit silly because he's sort of like spiders, spiders, and I'm just like, all right, fine. But it's when he pulls his cord, and you get the sort of like, and I'm glad they don't stick onto it they don't go the full Verhoeven sort of like eyes bulging.
They come close later with that stretched out shot.
They do, but this is just enough to be like. Yeah. There's just enough where you see the blood splatter on the screen, and then the other one is the guy who gets.
We're going to go into cinema history. Everything we do on this podcast will be utterly forgotten, but the phrase "the full Verhoeven" will enter the lingo.
Yeah. Oh yeah, never go the full. You don't go full Verhoeven unless you're really committed to it. But again, you get another scene where a guy enters the lift and he enters the moon's atmosphere, the moon's surface without a suit, and then all you see is they bring him back up, or some guys open the lift and his body's like, his guts are all torn out, and he's obviously the body's depressurized and stuff. Like, it does not shy away from showing, and just enough to be like, look, these guys are a piece of material away from dying constantly. Like, this is a dangerous job. And I like the fact that it shows that these are guys. So I like those scenes where it does show that, like, because you see the guys going crazy. You then get the guy who goes see the prostitute and starts sort of threatening her with a knife. And I'm like, okay, you sort of need that, because that sort of adds into the conspiracy of the sergeant, whoever that ends up shooting him, and all this other stuff. Fine. But you're right. You never actually get like a character or enough information about life as an actual miner, because there's a really cool scene, and like you say about the set, like the set design on this film is fantastic. Like, some of the sets on this are brilliant, but there's a scene where it goes back and they're sort of like, there's a panning shot, and it's clearly all the miners in their sort of sleeping quarters, and they're all in like caged pods with like a mattress and stuff in there, and there's a shower and sort of like a locker room area and stuff, and it's like, oh, life here is hard. Like, this is sort of like, they are, earning money to spend at home. Like, this must be like a short, how long do they spend on here? Like, how long are they here? Is it like a 6-month tour? Is it 12 months? I don't know. And when that scene happens and you see, I'm like, oh, I want to spend some time here. Like, there needed to be a character that lives down there that sort of works with Sean Connery, like an informant or something, to give you a glimpse of what it's like actually as a miner. And I think like we end up working in the echelons of power a little bit, middle management, as it were, almost. But you don't get the impact of a miner saying like, well, I've got to do this because if I don't hit my productivity targets, I don't get my bonus, which means I can't send money home to my family, which means my family starve. Like, I need to know that pressure that they're under in this dangerous environment to be really cool. That would take it up to that next level of being really good.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm thinking about like the A plot, B plot in the way that Shakespeare did it, with a sort of high low, right? Yeah, we're going to follow the king. We're also going to follow Prince Hal hanging around with Falstaff, and that's such a classic structure. You mentioned Gene Hackman, and I was thinking about Mississippi Burning. Mississippi Burning uses that structure. where you get a sense of why these people's lives matter, even if you're a racist who's never been to Mississippi or not an American, you get it. And here that's exactly what's missing. And I think you're 100% right to underline that point. Um, First of all, it starts out with that murder. You're right. That frames the movie as a murder mystery.
Hmm.
Uh, First of all, that mystery is solved halfway through, and then it becomes gunfight at the OK Corral, in a way that's much more boring to me. Um, but that murder mystery in space is really cool. I like that. I like, the
Mm.
conspiracy stuff. But you're supposed to be told why to care about the victims, right? I mean, in a murder mystery, the victim has to matter, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
especially if that's a class of people being murdered, you're supposed to feel something. Even the minors never have a conversation about it. You're never shown how they're responding. And to that point, it's been 12 months where it's gone from like, two minors every. I also like it's been exactly 2 6-month increments, right? It
Mm.
was like 42 every 6 months or something, and like two in the 6 months before a year ago. So, um, like clearly they've noticed it. Another miner has died right in front of them, like yet again, and they're just like back to work. Don't worry, guys. You know, there's never any conversation. You never live with them. You never see them. And just to make the second point, Sean Connery does have moments of concern for that prostitute. He seems, he's not mad. He is mad rather that that guy shot the assailant, shot the criminal there, but he's not overly mad. But he does seem to care about the prostitute and that
Mm.
this isn't just what's being done to her. Okay, that's great, but we don't even follow up to see how she's doing, except a few minutes later. She's not a character. The lives of prostitutes there, you get just enough to kind of like imagine what they might be. It's similar to Sean Connery's family. It's like there's just enough to make you want more.
Yeah.
Uh, but we're never given it, and it makes it hard to care about the victims in a murder mystery when you're not ever shown them or we're told to identify with them.
No, and that's the thing. I often sort of like, I think, because this film's, I think, 1 hour 50 push, like with credits and stuff. So it's not super long. It's not, but I don't, and I'm not saying I want like a 3 hour epic of anything like that. But there's like an efficiency of storytelling, and I think like this goes for some long language shots of sort of like panning across things, and I understand that, and I definitely think this person, David Himes, watched Alien and was like, Ridley Scott's got a really good vision of how it should look. I'm going to do that. Um, and I like a lot of that. Like, there's some great exterior shots. I think the miniatures and the sets on this are fantastic. I think so. They really did do a great job. And so yeah, I see why they want to use it. But yeah, it's one of those sort of like we've said this I think with other films. Like, there's a great film in here. Like, there's a
Mm.
great story to be told. It just seems to be just sort of like just missing that like you say, tweak some bits and pieces and you have a fantastic story. Like, and in my head, and we've said this before, like, would this story work better, I don't know, as a mini series, like a 3-parter where you go right and then you can follow those, um you can have those flashbacks or we get some more story. We can pad out a character that's a minor that's really struggling with this and sort of like
Mm.
is under pressure from his colleagues not to say anything. Like, he's the one that doesn't use it, and so but like he's under pressure not to talk about the effects that he's clearly seeing on his colleagues and all this other stuff. Like, there's a great story you could really sort of talk about corporate culture and greed and the disposability, uselessness of police in this
Mm.
environment. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
there's so much you could do with this that I just think that, they don't have the time, and so they sort of decide to focus on this A plot without giving the B plot.
Yeah, but I mean, you say they don't have the time. I mean, I would like to watch what you're describing, but I mean, again, I was amazed at after the credits, which take forever. You know,
Yes.
I was amazed at how after the initial scene or so, how rapid it is.
Mm.
And by the time you're at like 45 minutes to 50 minutes, you've basically resolved the mystery. and you're ready for a big conflict. And then you've got like an hour of why is he not arresting the guy, talking to
Yeah.
people, on the ship about like, are you with me or against me? Should we drink or not? I mean, long shots of like the countdown to the arrival of these three guys, as if I'm supposed to give a shit. And I really think they do spend an awful lot of time on that big bang muscular conclusion that could easily be spent on doing at least some of the things that you and I wanted to do.
Mm,
Um, but I couldn't agree more that there's a great film in here.
mm.
There really is something special here that, while it doesn't really come off, um, there's a version of this movie that is a fantastic movie that's talked about. I mean, this film is completely forgotten. Um, there's a version of this that's talked about as another Blade Runner.
Yes, exactly. Which was another film that it was suggested that this is in the canon of, which I thought was interesting because it could work in that again because then you could have this idea of like replicants versus humans as miners and all sorts of things. Like there's so much you could explore with this. Um, yeah, and I think that's the disappointment is that you've got so much potential that's not. And it falls into that sort of like I say the action finale, like it's even the second half, like it degenerates into that action. And I was curious, so I wanted to sort of like I looked at the director Peter Hyams. I know the name. I was like, why do I know that name? And then you look at his credentials, and he's done nothing. He did 2010, which was the follow up to 2001. Which again, a film we will get to both of those at some point because I actually think 2010 is worth
It's
visiting.
interesting. It's not a great movie.
No, but it's an interesting sort of. There's some interesting elements to it, like a very different take. But he did
Yeah.
Capricorn 1, but after that, like it's all a bit yeah. And then he does like Time Cop, Sudden Death, The Relic, like End of Days. Like his 90s career becomes very much sort of like action orientated, and I'm like, oh okay, I can see what you were aiming for. Like I think you were aiming for that as a bit of a that was your sort of clearly what you were going for at some point. Um,
Yeah.
and and so I think the action side of things takes over a little when this should have been a bit more French Connection rather than
Mm.
rather than Dirty Harry or let's say one of the later Dirty Harry films.
Yeah. I mean, I kept thinking of Chinatown and sort of
Yeah.
where I wanted this to point to, but yeah, I mean, I find myself during it was actually during the chase scene, even before the finale of the three guys coming on the ship. During that chase scene where he arrests the guy and
Mm.
he's put in prison, and the prison stuff is more interesting than the chase scene. I find myself watching the chase scene and just I'm not in the moment that in my own head I'm thinking, why do they even put chase scenes in anymore? Like, do you think that your chase scene is going to be better than all the other chase scenes we've seen? Like, what about your chase scene is going to stand out? And when I'm thinking about all that stuff, obviously I'm not in the
The
moment.
moment. Yeah, it's got to have a purpose. Like the thing with the chase scene, I think, and we've got to start looking at wrapping up soon. But like, one of the things I think about chasing, it's got to serve one of two purposes. Either it's got to be a tension point because that the person that's being chased down is critical to the investigation or to the plot. So them getting away would be, is really important. It would be a dramatic thing. So the capture needs to be really important. So you're like, oh, thank God he's caught him, sort of thing. Or the chase scene in and of itself needs to be impressive. Think like Jackie Chan, or one of those sort of scenarios where it's like, oh, the chase scene in and of itself is a stunt spectacular. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm watching it for that purpose. You know, or like I say, the first one is he captures him and it gives him information that cracks the case, reveals a big twist, or everything you thought was the case is not the case, or everything you thought was wrong, sort of thing. Like it needs to be important. And unfortunately, in this case, like the chase is fine. I actually kind of like the fact it feels claustrophobic. It ends up in this sort of kitchen area and has this sort of like bit of a fight. Like I actually am in the moment a bit more, but it doesn't actually boil down to a great deal until you get to the actual prison. And I like the idea of him being like held in non-gravity and all this other stuff. Like, yeah, it's that thing again of going like, you've just skimmed the surface of something fantastic, and I'm not, because you say about the machoism, like he grabs the shotgun, Sean Connery sort of grabs the shotgun, shoots it round the guy, which again I'm like, that's not how shotguns work.
Yes,
yes. And he's like, that's when he's sort of like, he's like, I fired. Did I fire 3 shots or only? If I fired 4 shots or only 3, and I'm like, oh god, you're doing the macho thing again. Like he's like, I'm ready to shoot you, and I'm just like, oh, like fine.
You do that so well.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, it is a bit disappointing. Like it should be again. Like I don't want to shoot you. Like stop making me do this. But it never feels like there's no reluctance to kill people.
But a guy who's that lucky, that ready to kill somebody, are we supposed to believe that like he was torn away from his family? I mean, that he's got to do this to be a good guy. He doesn't care whether he's a good guy. That's the entire point of that scene.
Yeah.
It's very confused. Yeah, I mean, I was not as in love with the chase. I mean, any chase where it's almost like a guy rolls a trash can, and the other guy has, and a chase where it's like, oh, you've shut the door. I've got to get my key card out and open the door. And that's like a major element
yeah.
of the chase. But then also there's this thing that he's running and he's carrying and he throws it in a boiling pot of water. I mean, I like the kitchen scene, but he throws it in a boiling pot of water and Sean Connery instantly plunges his hand because he's badass TM, into the water. What is it that he's thrown in the water? Is it the drug?
Yes.
But I mean, there's that drug everybody's got it in the station.
But he has it, yeah. Well, because he's obviously looking for information about a batch. That's the thing. Like he's looking so he can trace it. But again, the moment he puts his hand in the water, like you said, he's badass. I'm thinking, you're an idiot. Like move it off the stove and turn it over. Like it's not. Like I'm sort of in my head. I'm going like, this is not hard. Like this is. Yeah.
Take that pot over. Yeah, take it on the guy.
Exactly. Yeah. Use it as a weapon. Like, do something. Like, the moment he puts his hand in, that was when that sort of scene sort of fell a little bit away. Where I'm like, oh, you are stupid. Like, this is the dumbest thing you could have done. Like, yeah.
But don't you think it's supposed to sell him as he's such a badass that he?
100%, 100%. Like, he's supposed to be. Yeah, he's tough because he's willing to do that. But I'm just going, you're not the smartest copper on the field. Like.
Well, I guess he's so dumb. This is the only explanation that he didn't think to just go arrest the general manager. He's like, well, gotta wait for those 3 guys. Que sera, sera.
Yeah, There's so much that thing. Like, what could be the repercussions of him if he did arrest the general manager? Like, what, like there needs to be a reason he can't arrest him outright. They even RoboCop addresses this. Like by having the 4th directive, like it's silly, but like you can't act against a board member of OCP, like right.
I buy that completely. I mean, why is that silly? You think?
Well, no, it makes sense.
I know American culture. Put that shit in, man.
Yeah, but like, there's nothing to stop him. So why? There's plot holes that sort of like the more you think about it, the more gaping they become. So. Anyway, right?
Well, you always have last minute things that are brilliant. I have nothing more to say here. Throw out the stuff that you didn't get to in a concise form, because I know you always have additional thoughts.
Yeah. No, really, it's that the big thing for me is, like I say, is the Sean Connery element of like, why is this not? Why is this badass Sean Connery? Like, this is the Arnold Schwarzenegger problem. Like, I love Arnie films, but the thing is, Arnie films know they are Arnie films, right? Like, you watch like The Running Man, and The Running Man's a really good example. Like, you read the book by Stephen King, and it's very, very different. It's about a sort of like Michael Biehn should be playing Ben Richards rather than Arnold Schwarzenegger. but the Running Man, and we will going to be talking about the Running Man in this season. But the Running Man knows it's an Arnie film, and so you're like, cool, it's an Arnie film. And so even if this was an Arnie film, like if Outland was an Arnie film, it would be an action film from the get go, and it would be fine. You'd know what it was. As you said, the biggest problem with this is it doesn't know what it is. And so you're given this sort of like badass, sort of like Western marshal, but it wants to be like this. Yeah, it wants to have this almost like a private eye cop drama thing. And it's like, it's neither one or the other. And it tries to sort of serve both masters. And in doing so, it becomes this kind of like muddled mess. A literal film of two halves, where I totally agree. The first half is way more interesting than the second half. Almost to the Home Alone point of view. Like I hate like the fact that like, you know, Home Alone is a reference point for this film is a problem. When he goes up and sets up the joints in that tunnel so that he can depressurize it at a later point, angers me to such a point, because you've said how massive this place is. Like, how much other things like did he go and do that we don't know about, that he's gone, oh shit, I've got to go fix that now because someone could be killed if that part depressurizes. Like, it's not then explained that he's like, oh, I'm going to try and lure them into this tunnel, like, or I've got to sort of pull them into this cul-de-sac. Like, it constantly sort of like wants to sort of show you things, and you're supposed to assume things, but then doesn't really follow up on them. So it doesn't feel like a cat and mouse game at the end, which is what it clearly wants to be. It clearly wants to be that cat and mouse game of him taking out things. And all I could think about when I watched this is Rambo does this better. Going back to action tropes, if you want to do these things, have it where like he's set up all these things and he set up these traps, and you know, you're on his turf now, or like he's sort of like manipulated the environment. Cool, do that, but make sure that like he's set up to be that character. And this is the problem. Like, the character that you have in the first half of the film is not the character you have in the second half of the film. It's still Sean Connery throughout, on a level, literally at like spirit level, not moving, but like the actions don't weigh out. And again, the other part that we talked about, and I want to just very quickly touch on, is ever since we talked about what was the film that had Ralph Fiennes in, the drug film from the 90s. Oh my god. It's going to bother me now. But you know what I'm talking about. When we were like,
Catherine Bigelow.
Yeah, Catherine Bigelow's film. Thank you. Yes. You'll remember shortly. But we were saying like there's a follow-up to that film where the court case at the back of that film about sort of corruption in the police and racial prejudices in the police is way more interesting than some of the stuff that we've been presented with. I do love that film. Strange Days. Thank you. And there's a part of me in this where I'm like, hang on, he's walking away from this at the end of the film. I think he's been fired, but it's never really, did he quit or was he fired? Yeah. But like you say, this guy's just depressurized a massive part of a mining facility. Okay, but this is also the most productive mining facility. So the corporation's lost money, but other people are losing out. Well, what is the impact of this? Like, what has happened? Like, is he actually going to be prosecuted? No, he's walking away with his family. All right. Well, what's happening to the mining corporation? Have they just brought a new person in? Is the drug been eradicated? Has it been clean? Has he cleaned up the town? Doesn't appear to. Like, the film sort of ends on this sort of thing. It ends his arc because he's sort of like, I am a good man and I should now go see my family. And you're like, good for you. What happens to all these people that you've not engaged with? And that was the problem I had at the end of the film, where I was like, I don't understand that. Is this a happy ending? Is it supposed to be a downbeat ending? Like, I don't understand the sort of like the nub of this film. And as you said, it's not about anything. It doesn't give you that thing, so you don't get a payoff. But I'm just like, I'm happy. Well done. You succeeded. And so that's the problem I sort of have with this film, is it doesn't know what it is and it doesn't know what it wants to tell you at the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you have to do your Sean Connery more often. It's really, really charming. See, I'm an American, so I totally get the ending of this movie, which is he's a hero and he beat the bad guys. That's it.
But he doesn't beat them.
It doesn't matter.
But how did he beat them? Because he doesn't sort of like blow open the case. Like the solar system or the population doesn't go. There's no sort of like person that's going like, oh my god, this thing is corrupt, and we've got to take down the major. We've got to take down the
Right.
Wayland Yutani company or whatever. Like, there's no big
Because
break
the
in
movie's
this.
stupid.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's the problem. Like, even RoboCop's like, oh, OCP's taken down at the end of it. Like, to the corruption is
No,
sort
no,
of like,
no, no, no. The whole point of RoboCop
oh,
and
is
RoboCop 2 is like,
you
no,
can't
the
take down.
corruption will continue.
Yes, well, true.
We'll
But
get them someday.
yeah, but at least sort
Yeah.
of like the bad guy is taken down in a sort of a dramatic,
Right.
in a suitable way. But in this, I'm not even sure that he
Right.
succeeded. Like, I don't understand what the ending of this film's telling me.
See, I thought he quit. No, you're right. Of course, you're right. I mean, I'm teasing you, but I thought he quit, and I thought, probably at the end of that 1 year suspended animation trip to Earth, he will be arrested in front of his family and tried for destroying most of the IO mine base, which ruined the livelihood of all of these poor workers.
Yeah, he's got their actual more than that. They all starved because their crops were destroyed. And they've all had to abandon this IO thing because of this one thing. Like, I don't, yeah, it's that thing of like, they want to show you, this is one of those things that you see in these films where you do go like, there's a big dramatic fight at the end. Okay, cool. But what was the impact of that? Like, what was the effect of it? Like, but it doesn't even give me like a denouement or like an epilogue to say, even like some text at the end or whatever, like, or show Peter Boyle being marched away. I don't know, something.
Mm-hmm.
He's
not
just
even shown being arrested. He's just punched.
Yeah,
that's what matters because it's such an American movie, right? All that matters is that the good guy won and he punched the bad guy. That's all we need emotionally over here. All's right with the world. You got your punch in.
But it works in a Western, right? This is where like it would work because it's a simple. This sounds very patronizing, but it would work because it's a simpler time, right? It's a small mining town, almost on its own. So to humiliate and beat the land baron, to stand up to them, is to give the town power, and that's the point. So to punch out the baddie is enough, because it shows that the town is standing up to him and he no longer has the power to push people around, without the law stepping in. It doesn't work if you acknowledge that the person that you're punching out is only a middle manager and actually there's a large corporation at the top of that. Like, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And
quite so.
And so it should the end of this, because even the doctor's happy. She's like, we did a good thing. And I'm like, did you? Tell me, what was it? Like it and that's the problem with this film. That's why that was my biggest problem with this film, was coming out of it going like, I don't know what the good thing is that you've done.
Yeah. Well, we destroyed the mine, but we had to kill the village to save it. Among the dead are some bad people, which is a victory.
Yeah.
Among the piles of corpses are some bad guys.
Yeah.
Jesus smiled.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I was asked, not too long ago, I was thinking about what films should be remade, because I'm always sort of like, I hate the fact that they remake successful films. Like, don't remake that, because that version is not the definitive, but like, it's good, and so don't mess with it unless you've got another take on it. Mm-hmm. This is one of those few films where I'm like, oh no, revisit Outland.
Yeah,
revisit this, because it needs something. It could be there's something here that I think would be really, really cool.
I agree 100%, and I would just say all my instincts are Chinatown, Blade Runner are film noir. Shoot it like it's a damn film noir.
Yeah, forget the Western tropes. Lean into the noir, or even like a 70s cop drama. Lean into that aesthetic.
Well, and the backbone can still be Western. I mean, that Western backbone was the backbone of film noir.
Well, exactly.
It doesn't have your happy ending, right?
No, exactly. Like Serpico, or some of those sorts of films. Like, those the French Connection, and have it so that there's like, it's got those Western, I don't know, ideals, as Western tropes, but like, you're shifting it through the lens of those 70s cop dramas to have it again now. I think that would be well worth a revisit.
I think so too. And the one thing is, it cannot have a happy ending.
No.
This is one plot that just is not. There's no way you cut it. The best ending is a Pyrrhic victory. You know, this mind won't be using that drug anymore. What about all the others? I mean, that's the best case scenario.
Yeah, yeah. This needs to be a bit more downbeat, and I think I think that'll be fantastic. There's such a good story here to tell. Anyway,
I agree. I'm glad, and I'm glad. Hey, Luke, I'm glad you chose this film. I'm
mm,
really glad to see it. I had no idea what to expect. I would not have expected it to have been this good and this fascinating.
no, it is. I would say for all the stuff we've said about it, like it's still an enjoyable film. I still enjoy it as, like you say, quite a throwaway film. It's got its moments. I think it looks great. I think the money you spent on the sets and everything is fantastic. I think there are some good people in it. Um, I love Peter Boyle when he's not, Peter Boyle being sort of not trying to be funny is actually good. I think he's a great dramatic actor. Um, and so, yeah, no, I think there's parts of this film that really work. It's just a shame it's not a great film. It's just one of those that sort of like, in a world of sort of like where you've got Alien and Blade Runner, and then this sort of just falls shy of those, which is unfortunate, but could easily have stood on par with those at some point.
It's miles better than Soldier.
Yes.
It,
Yeah, maybe one day we'll get to Soldier, but probably not.
yeah, if we have to choose something else that gets in the canon of one of those movies, I'm voting for this over that.
Yeah, if we're going to do a sort of like a follow up, I'll do 2010 before we did Soldier. I think
Yeah,
that's yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. It's worth talking about, but the only problem with talking about it is I'd have to see it again.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the first. It's one of the. Yeah, it's not a good film. That'd be a very different. Maybe as a bonus podcast at one point where we just sort of tear that film down for an
We're
hour.
gonna have to do like a season of just like shit we didn't want to do. Just
Yeah,
like
films we openly hate. I think is yeah,
Mm. No,
yeah.
we're quite mean people when we don't like something.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
we'd be quite snarky and fun.
yeah.
That'll be the most popular season
Yes, it
ever.
would. What's unfortunate is I'm a big Kurt Russell fan. I think Kurt Russell's great. I think I love a lot of his films. That is the one film where I'm like, oh no. That's a very unfortunate film. We'll save that for day. Anyway, we have run to time. So any final thoughts on Outland before we go?
That thanks for showing it to me. That was my final thought.
Yeah, no, it's good film. I'm glad we got to sort of watch this. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are sort of heading still into the 80s. We're coming to sort of halfway point. We will be reviewing So Far soon. But before we do that, our next film is a return to franchise territory and further sequels. We're going to be talking about, let me make sure I'm right, we are talking about Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan on the next episode. So, this is sort of, we did Empire Strikes Back as a sort of the sequel. Now we're going to be doing Wrath of Khan, following up motion picture. So we'll see how we feel about that, because that's another one where we are talking about a very clear change in direction, a very clear change in tone, and often talked about as one of the best Star Trek films, much like Empire talks about as one of the best Star Trek films. So does it stand up? Do we think it that, or are we going to be making snarky Shatner jokes? We shall see.
We can do both.
We can indeed, but we shall definitely watch that.
It's a spectacular film, but Shatner's wig steals the scene.
Yeah, almost won an Oscar, that film, for his wig. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're enjoying this. But let us know, what have you seen Outland? Have you not seen Outland? And it's not one you've heard of. Let us know. I'll be interested to see what people think about this film, and Sean Connery's performance in this and other films. If you like to talk, we can reach out to us on social media at Pod Time Space. Whilst Twitter still exists, we may not be there for long. We shall see.
Yes.
But also, we have all that you can reach us out on comments on every other podcasting platform. So go leave a review in particular. We really appreciate all the feedback. And if you like what we're doing, we do have the Patreon, in which Julian and I are trekking through the Twilight Zone episode to episode. We're currently going through the third season on the Patreon. And on this feed, you are getting the season 1 episodes every other week. So there's an absolute dearth of entertainment on there, sci-fi and horror talk. We've just got to some of the classics most recently. that we've talked about. So if you like that, go check it out.
Not to
But
mention your 30-minute thoughts and all those other bonus features that you give.
yeah, 30-minute thoughts, quarterly creators corner. That's another one we do. So yeah, there's loads of stuff on there, loads of behind the scenes kind of bits and pieces and things we're talking about. So anyway, for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and thank you, Julian, for talking about Outland. And we shall see you aboard the Enterprise in the next episode.